Good morning and welcome to Saturday Special of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Two different eras, no, two different epochs, two different socio-cultural societies, and yet two philosophies almost identical in many respects, of course, different in others. But these similarities of these two philosophies bridge the gap in time and geographical distance and culture. Is it a sign that human beings, the enlightened human beings, think the same way? The Stoic philosophy, which is often quoted in the history of philosophy, is supposed to be having its origin in ancient Greece through philosophers like Zeno. But if we look at the philosophies per se all over the globe, we find this characterization of Stoic philosophy having originated in Greece is basically patently wrong. It ignores vastly similar philosophies in East, especially in Buddhism and in Gita. Gita is still older than Buddhism is, as a matter of fact. The philosophies in Gita are a derivation of philosophy from Puranas, Uttar Mimamsa, Dakshin Mimamsa, as well as part of it in Vedas. But the text of Bhagavad Gita, authored in similar time period, basically, transmitted orally for a long time, for centuries, prior to when Stoicism came into being, and is a central text of Hinduism. It is absolutely true that the Oriental philosophies like Gita are not purely philosophical. No, there's a difference. Zeno and Stoicism is absolutely philosophical, has no other connotation. But the philosophy in Gita, apart from being philosophical, is steeped in religion. And this religious veneer covering has robbed the essential title of being called philosophical, though now it's considered philosophical. But then we forget that in those ancient times, religion and mythology were more often used as vehicles for philosophical teaching. Shall I call them Trojan horses? And that was not only in India. Even the Red Sea Scrolls show that the philosophy of Judaism, was found camouflaged in religious and mythological thoughts. The pursuit of wisdom, virtue, and happiness are lifelong goals, and attaining these goals has been a worthwhile experience the world over. Such themes from ancient texts continue to the contemporary conversation. And the wise person of Gita is concerned with what is right action and how to exercise right judgment. Same as in Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Buddhism philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy, extracted a lot from Gita because of the geographical congruity. So this wise person becomes a karma yogi. He performs his own duties. He is a believer in Gita, Shraddha, and displays equanimity to pleasure and pain. Finally, there is a development of non-attachment and tranquility. And the people who leave, abandon all desires, sense of possession, discard their ego, they reach the highest level of being a human, Homo sapien. Look at the wise men of the Stoics, Seneca. And Seneca basically means sapien, embodies the ethical tenets of Stoicism, which brings them permanent happiness. So the base ethical tenets of Stoicism, permanent happiness, is absolutely identical to what is maintained in Gita. Appropriate action, same as right action, which belongs to oneself, virtue, detachment, telos. Telos is a word they use for goals, of living in accordance with nature, knowledge of laws of nature. These are the essential ingredients of Stoicism which lead to happiness. And for Seneca, happiness essentially means peace of mind. It's not having wealth, same as in Buddhism, same as in Gita. So this strand runs right from Gita onwards, and Stoicism did not do something extremely original. Yes, it was original as far as the Greece and Europe were concerned, because at that time the interaction between Orient and the Occident was not there. But it's not absolutely cut off. There's no cut off. Basically, it's a continuum. Maybe the vibrations of thoughts traveled. For Seneca, happiness essentially means peace of mind, which results from a constant practice of virtue. Same what is said by Krishna. In both systems, a wise person is one who has capacity for making correct judgment when undertaking action, and these then assume complete responsibility. They are not only aware of the more ethical levels, but they are ready to accept responsibility. The buck stops here. So happiness from knowing that we have done the right thing at the right time is a basic. But then look at the other similarities. Reading about Stoics, if you have read them, and Bhagavad Gita, you would find that both are a fight basically against the evil. Krishna reminds Arjuna time and again not to hesitate to fight against his relations, because he's a balanced person and it is his duty to fight adharma. Now, the religious connotation comes, but why we take adharma as a religious? Let's take dharma as ethical values, human values. In chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, verse 14 and 15, Krishna says to Arjuna that the senses contact objects which cause heat and cold, pleasure and pain, that have a beginning and an end. Nothing is ever permanent, everything comes to an end. Now, titka is endurance, and something that the Stoics call, whether they start from Zeno, the originator of Stoicism, and go down to Marcus Aurelius, they all advocated and practiced in their life fight against unethical values. The Stoics, whether they were privileged or from humble Heckman, led normal life in material world, but they practiced a philosophy and promoted a philosophy that was steeped in endurance and equanimity and ethical values. So what Krishna is telling Arjuna is practiced by them. Now, the earliest Stoic, Zeno, died 262 years BC. And he expressed the four virtues of Stoicism. They are courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. And Krishna explains to Arjuna that one who remains unaffected by pleasure and pain, who regards them the same, is a steady, balanced person. Such a one can be regarded as immortal because he is cognizant of the self, the absolute, the changeless, indestructible, and eternal. Exactly the lines on which Zeno, Seneca, and Aurelius talked about. In verse 221, Krishna tells Arjuna about the extremely delicate aspect of the art of living is to play our part in the world as though it was a reality, but never forgetting that the ultimate reality is not that. It's a mistaken perception that what's happening is the real. Yes, it's real for the time being, but not the ultimate reality. So he implies to stay detached while carrying on your worldly duties. That's the essence of a person who has overcome ignorance. Now, looking at Arjuna in the battlefield, in the Kurukshetra, one is reminded of many of the Stoics serving in military campaigns. They hung out in marketplace. They too fairly and unfairly faced arrest. Now, Antipater, the atheist, Portia, the iron woman, Seneca, the striver, and many Stoics up to Marcus Aurelius lived and acted the way Arjun would have. Barring the cultural difference, you cannot say that these Stoics were in any way different than the incarnation of Krishna's directive and advice. So I would say that there is not only similarity, but this is in fact the Stoics were embodiment and a personification of what Krishna was talking about. And I told you, even the iron woman pose, the striver. Look at the names that they have. And Aurelius said, there is no role so well suited to philosophy as the one you happen to be right now. Now, this right now is the philosophy of Gita. Do your duty now. Do not wait. Epictetus was in fact a slave who got free at the age of 30. And he became a Stoic philosopher. One can say that a lot of Stoic philosophy is in fact a paraphrase of Gita's philosophy. For example, at one time it says, within 10 days you will see a God to whom you are now a beast and an ape, and you will return to your principles and worship of reason. So relationship, kinship, which Arjuna was talking, is a quality of apes and beasts. But when you talk of your principles and reason, then you become a real human being. So one of the goals of any good Stoic is to act in accordance with reason, that element of the divine that we all possess. And since reason is seen as a path to happiness, virtue, and living well, sticking it out has tremendous benefits. Now, Stoicism does not treat humans as solitary creatures, despite its urging to give up and ignore the opinion of others. No, ignoring and living apart is different. That's exactly what Krishna also says, that you are a part of this society. So much so that for the first time in the history of civilization, Krishna said that we should not destroy the planet. He was possibly the first person to cry against destroying biodiversity. And people who think that these actions are beyond our control, Stoicism says no, they are not beyond your control. You have to cut yourself away from that, become indifferent if you can't act. So, for even though the human have access to the divine reason, you make mistakes. Now, here's again. Making mistake and owning responsibility is one of the basics of Gita as well as of Stoicism. Now, Epictetus says we live in as individuals in society. If the society is harmed, how can we not be harmed? And you remember in Mahabharata, Krishna had asked them not to use Brahmastra because that's destroy the universe. You can't destroy the society and yet keep on living. I think this is a lesson for China, USA, and other countries. So, Stoic philosophers understood what most people ignore, that life is transitory. And if I look at the Stoic view of cosmos, leans heavily on the idea of a constant change, and this was argued in a great manner by Heraclitus. Everything is in a change place of flux. Nothing is permanent. But a wrong which you do causes you to be rooted to that spot. So this philosophy. Now let's come to the basics. Despite your religion, the philosophy of Gita and Stoicism is such that it makes life not only worth living, but worth aspiring for. Number one, how can we make life better both in Stoicism and in Gita? First is the process and the results. Krishna in chapter 2, verse 47 says, you only have the right to act. At the same time, you do not have a right to the fruits of your action. You should not act out of motivation for the fruits of the action, but you should never be inactive anytime. Aurelius in his Meditations, book 10 says, enjoyment means doing as much as what is your nature requires you to do, and you can do that anywhere. Keep in mind the ease with which Logos is carried through all the things. Do not care what the end is going to be, and that is all you need. It's unfortunate how we work. Now, we work not for working, but for the bonus, for the perks, for the paid vacation. And that is a difference. Now, what is duty? That's the most important thing. Are we performing our duty? Krishna in chapter 18, verse 47 says, it is better to perform one's predetermined duty, even if one performs that duty imperfectly, than perform the duty of another person. When one person performs his own predetermined duty in accordance with one's nature, one does not incur any sin. Now, the concept of sin coming in philosophy is absolutely jarring, but then, as I said, religion camouflages the philosophy to present it. And the same is repeated by Marcus Aurelius when he says, whatever anyone does or says, I am bound to the good. Whatever anyone does or says, I must be what I am and show my true colors. Imagine the similarity of thought, the similarity of expression, and the similarity of inherent ideas. Then the question arises, duty to whom? Heraclitus says that the concentric circles can be used as a template. First and foremost, that duty is to self, mind and body, then to your family, then to your fellow citizen, then to your country, and eventually the mankind as a whole. Now, start with the first circle. Ask yourself, what do you owe your mind and body? Is being unethical acceptable? No. And Krishna says the same in chapter 2, verse 14. Arjun, everything comes and goes in life. Happiness and unhappiness are temporary experiences that rise from the sense and perception. Heat and cold, pleasure and pain will come and go. They never last forever. So do not get attached to them, have no control on them. Because and then Epictetus repeats the same thing. The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clear to myself which are external and not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. So choices are something within your control. But you can make a right choice or a wrong choice. Again, the thought pattern of these different Stoics and Krishna. But there's one major difference. Here the thought pattern changes from so many people. Krishna is only one. And in other words, if I say the psychological history, Krishna was able to present an encyclopedia of thoughts. Because, according to the legend, he is an avatar of Vishnu, the ultimate source of wisdom and intelligence. He presented it as such. And the Stoics, they represented the different parts. But if you come to the philosophy as such, you would find they are identical. Then another thing, the value of mind. The mind can be your worst enemy or the best friend. Krishna in chapter 6, verse 7 says, one who cannot control the mind and attain tranquility, to that mind heat and cold, pleasure and pain, honor or dishonor the same. A person who can control the mind is impervious. And the same thing Marcus Aurelius says in Meditations. You have the power over your mind, not on the outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The real question is, how do we care for the mind? And then the same idea comes in. As a matter of fact, even your complaints, grievances, what Krishna says in chapter 2:20, verse 20, for the soul there is neither birth nor death anytime. The soul is unborn, eternal, everlasting, premier. The soul is not slain when the body is slain. And Aurelius and Seneca say the same thing. It's better to conquer our grief than to deceive it. For if it has withdrawn, being merely beguiled by the pleasures and preoccupations, it starts up again. But the grief that has been conquered by reason is calmed forever. So, as a matter of fact, if you cut out the philosophy from religion, you would find that Stoicism is nothing but in fact an expression in very bold ways what Krishna was telling. We can see that Gita and Stoic both are philosophies that teach us. Now philosophies can be of two natures. One is just explaining, the other is a teaching philosophy, a model philosophy. They teach us how and why the process should be valued over the results. They teach us the importance of performing your duties without attachment to the results. They teach us that your emotions can be guided to attaining self-knowledge. How the simple act of sitting in silence can help you calm your mind. What grievance can teach you about living a better life. Now, all these things similar, but one camouflaged in religion and mythology. The other bald statements are identical, but there's a difference now. The difference would always creep in when the presenter, Krishna in India, Stoics, about 4,000 years after Krishna, the gap in time, so the more mind development is there. Secondly, the gap in the cultural background, the gap in the social background, social milieu rather, all that makes a difference. But shorn of all the covering, we find a huge similarity in those philosophies, and both aim at one thing. And that one thing is making a human being worth being called a human being. The real Homo sapien, the real man, the primeval man who is representative of God and become a Godhead himself. So that is the philosophy underlying both, and both are interconnected, not in fact separate philosophies. Thank you.